Well, welcome everyone, our distinguished guests, friends and colleagues from all over the world. A warm welcome to you for joining this book launch event for our recent volume published by Brill, titled Chinese Christian Witness, Identity, Creativity, Transmission, and Poetics. Your attendance and interest are gratefully acknowledged and much appreciated. We also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we meet today and pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. I would like to remind us some protocols. All participants are muted. If possible, please keep your video on. While this might not be possible for some, it does help presenters to see faces. The session will be recorded. If for privacy reasons you do not wish to be recorded, do please keep your video off. You may signal you have questions or comments in the chat box. Please remain on mute until you are asked by the chair to contribute. In honor of the first Syriac missionaries to China from the Church of the East, I would like to begin today with the oldest Chinese hymn translated by the Syriac monk to Chinese in poetic form in the 7th to 8th century and is still sung by Chinese people today. 天上诸天生静叹，大地重念普安和。人缘真性蒙医治，三才慈父阿罗诃。All heavens worships in great awe. All humans long for earth accord. Humanity's true nature is assured. Gracious, three-powered Yahweh Lord. Amen. We give thanks to our God who enabled this entire project from the beginning to the end. I would like to acknowledge the gracious support of the following organizations: Center for Global Christianity and Mission, Boston University; the University of the University of Divinity, especially Whitley College, my home college. Good to see there's a research hub there today. Joining us. The McAdams Adventist History Research Grants, Angelina Noble Center, Australian Center for Christianity and Culture, and in addition, for today's event, International Association of Mission Studies, Australian Association of Mission Studies, and China Source. I would like to pay tribute to Dao Zi, a well-known Chinese Christian artist and critic, one of our contributors, who passed away late last year. Our cover page features his work titled The Seven Candles, which symbolizes the radiance of disciples' inner spirituality, as well as the formation of transparent and vibrant colors within the fellowship of the church. Indeed, it is Christian fellowship and friendship that have been the driving force behind this book, shaping both its vision and its collaborative spirit. When Daryl and I began dreaming of this volume, we wanted to craft the theme of identity, creativity, transmission, and poetics to show a process of indigenization within a culture from insiders' perspectives. We are grateful to the series editors of Theology and Mission in World Christianity, the editor of Mission Studies, the Brill staff, the 27 authors and artists, the translation team, the copy editor, the peer reviewers, and endorsers for their timely work, patience, and generosity, and many people who pray for us for this project. Today, after our short introductions, we will hear from contributing scholars and artists from around the world about how Chinese Christians have understood and participated in the mission of God across continents and traditions over the past few centuries. Then our distinguished guest, Professor Lauren Pfister, will respond to the volume, followed by a time of Q&A. Professor Kirsten King, as one of the series editors, will make the official launch announcement before we finish. Now I will hand over to my co-editor, Professor Darrell Ireland, to introduce the scholarly chapters before I focus on the artist's works. Over to you, Darrell.
Thank you. Thank you. Just 50 years ago, China was in the midst of the Cultural Revolution. Few people spoke about Chinese Christianity, and those who did delivered their pronouncements in the voice of a medical examiner. They delivered a postmortem. What had gone wrong? What had doomed the Chinese church? The prevailing assumption was that Christianity was dead. In hindsight, we realized that the news of Chinese Christianity's death was greatly exaggerated. It not only survived in China, where Christians have multiplied at an astonishing rate in the last 5 decades, but Chinese churches are also thriving in Europe, the Americas, Oceania, and most recently, in Africa. Now exceeding 100 million followers of Jesus Christ globally, those who talk about Chinese Christianity no longer speak in the hushed tones surrounding death, but with the energy and enthusiasm that accompanies astonishment. I mean, how can this be? Our new book, Chinese Christian Witness, seeks to answer that question by looking at Chinese missiology. How have Chinese Christians understood and participated in mission? The temptation, of course, is to focus on what's most familiar. For instance, recently Chinese Protestant house churches have mobilized to set apart and send 20,000 missionaries to foreign countries by 2030 to pay back their so-called gospel debt to the 20,000 missionaries who first evangelized China. And that grabs attention because China is supposedly now a missionary sending nation. It's joining the ranks of countries like England, the United States, Korea, and Brazil, who have created special mission sending organizations to propel missionaries to distant parts. And indeed, that is an important development in Chinese missiology. And so this book provides some of the very first research on that movement. However, to reduce Chinese mission to the moments when Chinese Christians reproduced the organizational structures that Europeans designed in the 18th century to sustain the modern missionary movement, that's to constrain the breadth and the full dynamism of Chinese missiology. For the purposes of our volume, such a definition is simply too narrow. Instead, we begin with the words of Jesus to his disciples. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses. From Acts chapter 1, verse 8. To be a witness is not conditional upon belonging to a certain kind of mission-sending organization, but upon Jesus' own promise. He declares that his disciples will be witnesses, and their testimony will be heard in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. So how are Chinese Christians witnessing? How are they fulfilling Jesus' promise? As you might expect, in all kinds of creative ways and in very different situations. This book assembles stories not just from mainland China, but also Southeast Asia, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Australia, the Middle East, Africa, Europe, and the United States. The volume explores the missiology of Chinese Roman Catholics, Chinese Orthodox, Chinese Protestants, Chinese Pentecostals, and Chinese indigenous Christian movements. It also stretches across time. This book covers from the 17th century to the 21st century, which means it also crosses that 1949 threshold with the establishment of the People's Republic of China. And so some of our chapters deal with China's registered churches, while others focus on unregistered churches. And at the end of all of that diversity, what is one of the key takeaways from this book? Well, it's that Chinese Christian witness is vibrant, it's evolving, and it's certainly manifold. To organize all of that material, we have created 4 sections: identity, creativity, transmission, and poetics. And let me briefly say a word about those sections. Identity, in my opinion, has been the most generative question in Chinese theology. How can I be Chinese and Christian? It also turns out to be very important in Chinese missiology. How does my Chinese identity shape my witness? And how does my role as a witness shape my identity as a Chinese person? Then in creativity, Christianity is a culture shaping religion. So it becomes manifest in everything from reworked manners and music to new directions in law, literature, and architecture. And the second part of this book examines how Chinese Christians have been reshaping Chinese culture and how their innovations point to Christ. The third section is devoted to transmission. The explosive growth of Chinese Christianity in this century begs the question, how did this happen? What have Chinese Christians been doing to pass along their faith? And then finally, the book concludes with poetics. Through the work of 7 Chinese Christian artists, we seek to understand what these gifted seers grasp about witnessing. How do they perceive it shaping Chinese Christianity? Well, clearly you can see that the lineup is full, and to cover all of it would require you to read the whole book, which of course we hope you will do. But tonight we will provide only teasers. Many of our authors have been able to record a 2-minute video to awaken your curiosity. And I believe they will be able to do that and begin to draw you into this surprising, creative, and fascinating world of Chinese missiology or Chinese Christian witness, which this book makes manifest to the public for the very first time. And so we're very excited to share it with you. Dr. Yang, would you like to share a little bit more about the art?
Sure. Following the scholarly chapters, the last section of the book brings the much understudied lived poetics or aesthetics to the center of missiological reflection. 7 prominent contemporary Chinese Christian artists reflect on their creative process in their native language, followed by English translation. And you will find in the book, actually, it's got full-colored paintings and sculpture. It's all on there, and together with their own reflection. Their essays correspond to the 3 themes of the volume: identity, creativity, transmission. You might like to imagine their icing on the cake or cherry on top. As grassroots intellectuals, the filmmaker Hu Jie and the poet Gu Lian attempted to retrieve the stories of forgotten and deceased victims of China's recent traumatic history in order to bring about healing and justice for the nation. They are in turn awakened by the subjects of their artworks in their own spiritual search, thus forming their unique Christian identity. The playwright Jiang Yuanlai, you will hear a little about his own reflection later in the video. He produces large-scale transnational and transgenerational dramas by traveling and recording the stories of forgotten people. The prolific writer Shi Wei attempts to retrieve history through imaginative fiction which foregrounds key Christian leaders of the 20th century. The Santisan ink-wash paintings of Daozi deliberately locate and contextualize the artist's expression of faith within the Chinese historical and cultural tradition, calling all to return to sacredness for spiritual and cultural renewal. The creativity of these prominent elite intellectuals continues to reconfigure and reshape the heartland of Chinese contemporary cultures today. Distinguished from the public intellectuals, the artworks and reflections of the sculptor Ye Weilin and the Canaan hymn writer Lu Xiaoming can be read as exemplary Christian testimonies and devotional pieces within the house church movement. Their works bear witness to the process of transmission of the gospel in contemporary China. In the last chapter, I curated these artists' works by exploring their cultural, social, spiritual dispositions and attempt to provide a thick description and exegesis of their artworks. I argue that the artwork exhibit not only the artist's own search for meaning and significance, but a multifaceted kaleidoscope of social reality of contemporary China from Christian aesthetic lens. By remembering, reimagining, responding, these Christian artists provide a trajectory of Chinese lived poetics as a missiological epistemology, a way of knowing that invites all to participate in the missile day for beauty, truth, and goodness in the world. Overall, we believe the interdisciplinary, intergenerational, interdenominational, and ecumenical character of this volume illuminates the breadth and depth of Chinese Christian witness in both local and global contexts. By amplifying insider perspectives and the voices of Chinese artists, this work contributes a distinctive and emerging missiological voice to world Christianity. So now please sit back and enjoy the authors and artists introducing the work in the next 35 minutes.
And as those videos begin, let me just invite you to go ahead and type in questions as you're watching the videos, because some of our authors here, they'll be able to respond to those later.
Hello everyone, my name is Joshua, and I'm the author of the chapter Making the South Seas a Chinese Mission Field, Chinese Evangelical Missionaries to Southeast Asia 1920s to 1950s. And I'm very grateful and honored that I have been able to publish this chapter in the edited volume by Yang Xiao Li and Darrell Ireland called Chinese Christian Witness, in which we are launching today. So what is this chapter about? So, early Chinese missionaries engaged in intercultural and diasporic religious work in Southeast Asia since the 1920s. In spite of their contributions, their voices have received little attention, especially in English language scholarship. This paper recovers their voices and highlights the ways in which they imagined, rationalized, and undertook their work in Southeast Asia from the 1920s to 50s. Significantly, by doing so, they carved out Southeast Asia as a quote unquote Chinese mission field. So, the uniqueness of this work lies in giving voice to a range of early Chinese missionaries from South China who undertook pioneering mission work in Southeast Asia alongside their Euro American counterparts. Importantly, I provide two interventions. Firstly, I show that these early Chinese missionaries pioneered intercultural work and did not limit themselves to ethnic Chinese communities in Southeast Asia. And secondly, I also observed robust attempts to equalize the inter-ethnic relations between the Chinese and Euro-American missionaries. Finally, I hope this article will bring attention to the fact that the missionary vocation was becoming more ethnically and culturally diverse since the early years of the 20th century. Thank you.
The article of the influence of ideologies and the commitments on mission starts with a crisis in China in the 1920s. Back in the 1920s, Chinese Christians faced one of the greatest crises, the anti-Christian movement. Many accused them of being foreign slaves and the tools of imperialism. How did they respond? Three influential Chinese Christians gave three very different answers to the same challenge. Their stories show how personal commitments and ideologies powerfully shape the way we do mission. First, Zhao Zichen, a leading theologian, he loved missions but criticized them for controlling Chinese leaders and failing to blend Christianity with Chinese culture. He called for a truly Chinese church that kept strong ties with the West. Second, Li Chunfan, a former Christian student, he completely rejected Christianity, joined the Communist Party, and led the anti-Christian movement. To him, missions were nothing but cultural imperialism. Third, Zhang Yijing, a bold apologist. He defended the gospel fearlessly, urged the Chinese churches to become financially independent, but still wanted Chinese and Western Christians to work together as citizens of God's kingdom. Why such different responses to the same pressure? According to the chapter, the answer lies in their core commitments. Zhao blended Christianity with Confucianism and nationalism. Li placed nationalism and communism above everything else. Zhang put biblical faith and God's kingdom first. The chapter reminds us shared scripture and culture do not automatically produce the same answers. Different identities and ideologies drive Christians onto very different paths in mission. In times of crisis, our deepest commitments are revealed. Today, as nationalism rises again, this 1920s story still challenges every missionary and every Chinese believer. What do we value most? Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Ng, and I wrote the chapter called Constructed Identities and Potent Imaginaries, a missiological reflection on mainland Chinese ethnic and racial identity. And in this chapter, I explore how racial identity was constructed in the West, and in particular, how they constructed the racial identity of Chinese as being yellow. But I also explore how within mainland China, ethnic identity was also constructed as 56 nationality groups. And the point of the chapter is really to explore these constructions and how they impact and how they have impacted how Westerners and Chinese have seen others and even treated others. And we end the book by the chapter, by looking at how the book of Philippians helps us and gives us insight into how to process this theme of constructed identities.
Hello everyone, my name is Michel Chambon. I'm a researcher here in Singapore. I'm a French Catholic theologian and a cultural anthropologist. I've been working mostly on Chinese Christianity for the past 20 years. So in this book, I wrote a short chapter on Chinese Catholics, focusing especially in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Often we hear that the Catholics have been less dynamic in China than the Protestants. Often we hear a lot about the Sino-Vatican relationship, or the voice of historians talking a lot about what happened in the 17th century, 18th century. The goal of my chapter is different. It's really to focus on people on the ground, on the different aspects of life of the church in the 1890s, early 2000. So I try to go beyond a very nationalistic political or clerical approach of Catholicism to really explore how those Chinese Catholics have worked hard to make their faith available to all, to make their church Catholic again. So have a look. You will learn about efforts on buildings, effort on social work, effort on social engagement and training and traveling, all kind of things that make the church in China, the Catholic communities, absolutely fascinating.
Hi, I'm Mike Copeland. I'm an assistant professor of missions at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. My chapter in Chinese Christian Witness focuses on the challenges and opportunities of Han Christian identity in engaging Uyghur Muslims. I came to this research in about 2014, 2015 because of an encounter I had with a Han Chinese Christian who had come to Xinjiang and was reporting to me his experience. He was a medical doctor, had gotten to meet many Muslims from around the world who were coming to China to study medicine. And then he learned about Uyghurs, who are their Muslim identity predominates their ethno-religious understanding of themselves. And he went to Xinjiang expressly to share his beliefs and then also to get to know different Uyghurs. He told me about, to his surprise in his journey, the animosity and coolness at times that he received in just meeting Uyghurs on the street or in taxis. He also was able to communicate how many good conversations he was able to have. But he also told me the story of as he left, as he was leaving, he boarded his airplane and Japanese businessmen boarded right after him, sat next to him. And he had come from an area of China that especially remembered the aggression of Japanese armies during World War II. And so he came to the realization really quick that the way he felt towards these Japanese is probably the way that Uyghurs feel towards him. And that expressly shows the challenges and opportunities. The challenges of reaching and engaging Uyghurs by Chinese Christians is sometimes that is a realization that doesn't occur. But oftentimes it can occur. Then on the Uyghur side as well, there are often Uyghur Muslims that once they encounter a Chinese Christian, they are flabbergasted, really, in finding a Chinese, Han Chinese that actually have similar beliefs to them. So my chapter focuses on that and engaging that tension and trying to resolve it as best as we can at this point in time.
Let me ask you a question. Can Asians be racist to each other? What does it look like? Where does it come from? And my question, how does this impact our witness and missions? I'm talking about that feeling for many children of migrants, the embarrassment, resentment, or suppression that we can feel towards our parents or other Chinese phobes. We observe some behaviors that they do and think, oh my gosh, that's so Asian. This phenomenon is called internalized oppression, where the dominant white culture's oppressive actions and beliefs about racial minorities are accepted, internalized, and turned towards members of their own group. In other words, the beliefs that the dominant Western culture holds towards Chinese people, we can absorb them and it impacts how we view ourselves, our families, and our communities, even our churches. We might not be racist, but we can show prejudice and discrimination, othering each other. How does the dominant culture often represent Chinese people? In most of my childhood, we saw that people were worried that we'd be swamped by Asians or Chinese people were carriers of COVID. Maybe you heard narratives like Chinese people buy up all the property, baby formula, and selective school places. And so this makes most of us, children of migrants who so want to succeed and fit into majority culture, want to distance ourselves. We want to become more like the dominant privileged culture. And this can happen in the church when we have negative feelings towards the old generation, while consistently favoring Western pastors, resources, and theologies. Now, at the same time, the nations are coming to Australia and moving into our neighbourhoods, many from China, and with shared history, culture, and values. Surely we could be best to reach these people with the gospel. But until we deal with internalized oppression, we miss out on what God might be doing amongst this significant movement of lost people. Instead of the evangelistic zeal of the global south, we can join the stagnation of the global north. We'll read more in my chapter, Internalized Oppression in Chinese Australian Christians and its Mission Impact. Blessings.
Hello, this is John Lai from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. My chapter is entitled Reshaping Modern Chinese Literary Landscape: Chinese Christians' Pioneering Attempts in the Late 19th and Early 20th Century. In order to underscore the role and contribution of Chinese Christians in transforming Chinese culture and imagination, this chapter investigates some Chinese Christians' pioneering attempts in literary creation that conducted original experiments in terms of literary approaches and religious poetics, as demonstrated in some earlier works of Chinese Christian literature, particularly the so-called New Age novels in 1895, as well as some Christianity-inspired poetry by Bingxin, and Chinese Catholic dramas of the early 20th century, which trace the emergence of different genres of Chinese Christian literature during this fascinating period of the Christian interaction between China and the West. The Chinese Christian authors have exercised their creative capacity to express their own interpretation of the Christian faith and perception of biblical themes against the constraints of Chinese cultural, religious, and political context. Traditional Chinese literary forms and narrative techniques were creatively integrated with biblical images and rhetorical devices. This demonstrates the ways in which Christian imagery and symbolisms were transformed by linguistic manipulation into new contextualized forms of expression, which expand the literary and religious imagination of Chinese readers and reformulate the poetics of modern Chinese literature. This study has informed our understanding of the late imperial and republican era transition, that Chinese Christians emerged as a significant force in reconfiguring and reshaping Chinese culture and imagination, and that Chinese Christian literary and performative genres have helped to transform and modernize the Chinese literary landscapes. I hope you'll find this chapter interesting. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Joseph Lee, and I want to introduce you to my chapter on Hong Kong Christian cinema. Here is an advertisement about a theater used for evangelism in 1950s Hong Kong, as well as the schedule of the local religious radio program. So my chapter trying to answer a question: what happens when Christianity show up on the movie screen? I look at some historical moments when Christianity and Chinese cinema came together in Hong Kong during moments of crisis. After the migration to the British colony following the 1949 Communist Revolution, and later during personal struggles with illnesses, different generations of filmmakers use movie to tell personal and family stories of survival and endurance. They help audience to make sense of pain, trauma, and uncertainty through the lens of Christian values. I focus on 3 movies. Born Again, released in 1950, was the first Cantonese Christian production about a woman refugees. Other examples include Life is a Miracle, 2001, and The Miracle Box, 2004, both dealing with loss. Instead of lecturing the audience, these movies invite them into a moving experience of love and sacrifice. They communicate the lived experience of Christianity through visual culture, shared emotion, and good storytelling. If you want to find out more about the making and impacts of Chinese Christian film culture, please read my chapter. Thank you very much.
In Isaiah chapter 14:3, verse 19, the Lord said to the people of Israel, "Look, I'm doing a new thing. I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." The God we believe in is always doing new things that seems impossible to us. From a human point of view, it might seem impossible for fundamentalist and modernist Christians to study and live together in the same seminary, and to truly respect one another. With people, that may be impossible, but with God, nothing impossible. In my chapter, Chinese Theological Education in a Post-Denominational Era, the example of Nanjing Union Theological Seminary, I explore how God has been doing something new in Chinese theological education. The chapter not only looks at how theological education in a post-denominational context can transform and liberate people, but also bears witness to a new thing God is doing. This case study shows that China's rapid social and political changes have introduced new elements, even a new model into ecumenical theological education, which has long been shaped by Western churches. It also shows how Nanjing Union Theological Seminary has found its own path, developing a form of theological education that responds effectively to its post-denominational context.
Good day, everybody. It's a big pleasure to be a part of this book launch today. My name is Dirk Munch. I'm an architect, and for 15 years I've been involved in the research and planning of Christian architecture in China. A few years ago, in the course of the field study for my book China's New Churches, I documented over 150 church buildings in the city of Fuzhou. And one of the most exciting discoveries I made was a small but very diverse group of buildings that I later called the embedded churches. Chinese churches are often discussed in terms of their traditional style, their iconic appearance. But what happens when a community cannot or does not want to build a conventional church? What happens when it is bound by the conditions of place, its limited funds, or its own theology? Embedded churches give us an answer. In my chapter, I trace 3 such cases in Fuzhou. You'll read about a Catholic church completely hidden in a leftover urban space. You'll see an elevated Protestant church spanning across 2 residential blocks. And finally, you'll learn about a church that was actually designed to mimic its neighborhood. Now, these churches, they are not mainstream, certainly, but they show us that under certain conditions, the conventions of traditional Christian architecture are no longer a limitation, but they become the starting point for a conscious and very individual architectural journey. So Christian architecture in China is not just about iconic form. It is about negotiation with place, with tradition, and with the questions of how visible a Christian building needs to be in order to be successful. Thank you, and enjoy the reading.
Hello everyone, I'm Jingyi from Beijing. It's a great honor to share the stories of China and the witnesses of Chinese Christian in this book. Someone asked me why I chose such a heavy topic as funerals. In fact, this idea stemmed from visit I personally experienced several years ago. The Huan Church held a new church dedication service at their location, and I attended as an invited guest. After the service, the pastor introduced their ministry and mentioned their unique Chinese Western hybrid funeral style. Though unintentional, the speakers was struggled with me, as I instantly recognized as an excellent testimony of cross-cultural interpretation. The difficulty I encountered in writing was that burial is no longer permitted in larger cities like Beijing, and I lack sufficient knowledge and experience. Additionally, I was unsure how to express certain Chinese meaning in English. Today, this article has reached the readers. First and foremost, I would like to thank the scholars and colleagues who offered me suggestions and English collections. If I were to highlight the strengths of this article, I would say it serves as a model for the Sinicization of Christianity. Thanks.
Did you know that the history of the Orthodox Church in China spans over 300 years? And Orthodox missionaries had quite complicated relations with their words and described them as cunning idolaters who were indifferent to Orthodox faith. Remarkably, this image started changing by 1850s when Orthodox missionaries realized the potential their words had. This chapter sheds light on the first Orthodox priest in China, Father Maxim Leontiev, and also on the process of translation of Orthodox liturgical texts and New Testament. It also mentions some interesting facts. For instance, Lun Yuan, the main assistant of the first Orthodox translator of the New Testament, spoke no Russian. Or, for instance, many mission bases and Orthodox schools were opened on the initiative of the local people. Chinese Orthodox have worked at the mission as translators, choristers, catechists, and later clerics, monks. And what is interesting, since at least early 20th century, missionaries saw the Chinese Christians as the driving force in missionary activities, and collaboration between Chinese and Russian members of the mission as the most fruitful in the spread of the Orthodox faith.
Hello, I'm Alex Mayfield, author of Chapter 13, Fighting for Souls in the Latter Rain. What does it mean to believe you're living at the end of time? For early Pentecostals in China, this was not an abstract theological idea, but a lived reality, one that shaped how they understood the world, the church, and especially their sense of mission. In my chapter, I explore how Chinese Pentecostals articulated and lived out their mission at the end of the world by exploring Chinese language sources from Moklai Chi's Pentecostal Truths. These sources give us rare insights into how Chinese Pentecostal witness developed in ways that were connected to the broader global Pentecostal movement, but were also locally grounded and theologically distinctive. They understood the outpouring of the Holy Spirit as evidence that the latter rain had begun. This in turn signaled that humanity had entered the final stage of God's redemptive plan. Yet this eschatological vision was not merely speculative. It produced a particular kind of Christian life marked by holiness, spiritual vigilance, and deep urgency in evangelization. Chinese Pentecostals called one another to watch, to prepare, and to obey. They pursued lives of moral discipline and reconciliation, organized revival meetings and prayer gatherings, and founded schools while circulating religious literature. All of these efforts were oriented towards a single goal, the salvation of as many possible before time ran out. Despite the significance of global Pentecostalism, this movement has often been overlooked in standard histories of Christianity in China. Yet evidence suggests that Pentecostal and charismatic forms of faith have played a major role in shaping modern Chinese Christianity. So by examining these early voices, I believe we begin to recover a neglected perspective, one in which Chinese Christians were not simply recipients of a global movement, but active interpreters of history, agents of religious change. This chapter then invites us to reconsider both the history of Pentecostalism and the global story of Christianity itself as it's expressed in China. I hope you enjoy it.
Hello, I am Christy Cheishan Chow. First, my thanks to the editors, Shirley and Darrow, for bringing this volume together, and to all of you for being here. My chapter looks at how a religious community adapted its mission during a time of political and cultural change. I focus on a Chinese Seventh-day Adventist radio ministry in Hong Kong from 1977 to 2003. On the surface, this is a story about the media and religion, but more fundamentally, it is about how global Christianity becomes local. I argue that this radio ministry wasn't just a tool for evangelism. It was a creative effort by Chinese Adventists to make their message meaningful in their own cultural context. My chapter also traces a shift in Adventist mission thinking. While still rooted in the belief in Christ's second coming, it became more attentive to everyday life. This is reflected in programming that moved beyond doctrinal preaching to topics like health, family life, and moral reflection. I also emphasized indigenous agency. Chinese Adventists in Hong Kong were not simply receiving Western mission ideas. They were actively reshaping them, using their own language, cultural values, and networks to reach audiences across China, Hong Kong, and Macau. Overall, the chapter contributes to the study of Chinese Christianity and global mission history, showing how religion, media, and diaspora identity intersect, and how mission is shaped by local context and lived experience. Thank you for your interest, and I hope you enjoy the volume.
Hi everyone, my name is Tobias Brandner and I'm a professor of World Christianity and Mission Studies at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. We often talk about the shift in global Christianity from the north to the south. Now this shift is equally visible in mission movements. Today we see mission happening from everywhere to everywhere. Chinese Christians are part of this trend. They step into the global mission field in surprising and creative ways. In my chapter, I introduce some of these bold young women and men now serving in Southeast Asia, in Africa and beyond. They work as language teachers, as church planters, in Chinese traditional medicine. Many of them work in so-called creative access nations. That means they need to remain hidden. I critically evaluate the numbers, as estimates of the size of the mainland Chinese mission movement varies wildly. And I try to categorize the diversity of people involved: rural house church evangelists, urban professionals, entrepreneurs from Wenzhou, ethnic minority Christians from Yunnan, even diasporic returnees. Their stories reveal both courage and fragility, ambition and humility, and they raise a provocative question. Is China truly becoming a missionary nation, or are we witnessing only a ripple rather than a wave? And what does the presence of these missionaries mean in the context of the rising global power of China? Are they part of a kind of soft power extension of China, or are they rather standing in contrast to China's increasing global impact? My hope is that readers will come away intrigued by the interplay between faith, migration, and China's growing global presence, and curious about how these missionaries embody the challenges and the possibilities of a Chinese mission century. I wish you joy and inspiration as you read this book.
What if I told you that one of the most successful global Christian movements started with no headquarters, no ordained clergy, and no foreign funding? In 1922, Watchman Nee launched a missional revolution in China that has now exploded across every major continent. And how did they do it? And they stopped relying on professionals. Nee's secret was not a better building. It was the universal priesthood. He argued that if you are a child of God, you must have a spiritual gift, period. He rejected the clergy-laity divide. which for him paralyzed the body of Christ. And in this movement, every member is an active, functional part. There are no spectators. Ni did not send just missionaries, he sent paratroopers. He pioneered a strategy called mission by migration. And instead of traditional guerrilla warfare mission tactics, he encouraged entire groups of believers to move to strategic cities, find jobs or go to school, and live out the gospel as a polycentric community. From Taiwan to Brazil, from South Korea to the US and Europe, the movement spread through the everyday lives of ordinary people. And this is not just a history lesson. And my chapter explores a constructive ecclesiology for the third millennium. We dive into radical equality, how Ni was ahead of his time in breaking down gender boundaries in church meetings. And what about the new way, replacing one person preaching with prophesying meetings where everyone shares, with a goal of global revitalization? If you want to see the blueprint for a fully mobilized church, you need to read my chapter, Missio Dei and Universal Priesthood of All Believers, Watchman Nee and the Mission of Local Church Movement, and discover how to turn a dormant congregation into a global missionary force.
就像中国现代一位最重要的思想家曾经说过的，中国是世界上最大的密国，就秘密的密啊。的确，在这片的大地的深处啊，迄今还淹没着，也运行着许多悲壮的秘密的故事史诗啊。那么，姚老师他们主持的这本文集呢，呈现了中国基督教的这个宏大的故事中的一片的天地啊。那个我自己作为一个完全这个生活服侍在中国内地的基督徒的剧作家呢，长期呢奔走在这片大地深处，也通过这个戏剧创作和这个讲课研究，一直在不断的发现、报道、介绍这片大地上主带领他的儿女们走过的悲壮的历史故事啊。希望杨老师的这本书的出版啊，让全世界的同工们、弟兄姐妹们更多的了解这片辽阔的大地上的这么多可歌可泣的故事，这么多丰富的信仰的宝库、神学的资源、基督教文化的成就。我在这本书里呢，也应邀这个写了一篇文章，简要的介绍了这方面的情况。这儿的故事太多太多了。那么，就像莎士比亚曾经说的，我们有时候不了解情况，只是因为我们离开现场太远。但愿这本书带领朋友们、弟兄姐妹们走进悲壮的现场，了解基督带领的中国的儿女们的故事。
May I now begin some reflective responses? This is a remarkable book. Most of texts that portray witness are going to be given in the first person. But we have here not only first-person testimonies of artists and those who are creative agents in the Christian Chinese worldview, but also we have secondary academic voices that are giving depth and breadth. Yes, this was illuminating depth and breadth. I want to focus on some of the depths that are also in many of these chapters that have not necessarily been highlighted. They're not, it's not that they're being avoided, but there is pain, there is struggle, there are traumas, there are opposition voices that are also in this volume. This suggests to me that witness is always in a context, and sometimes in a context, especially within places where ethnic Chinese persons and even ethnic minorities who are Chinese Christians. They're Chinese citizens, but they're Christians. That's not a major element here, but it is still in the context of often what is conflict and sometimes what is outright enmity. And these are not avoided. I appreciate that. I think this shows the kind of depth and dynamic that has also enforced some dimensions of the questions of identity, that have stimulated creative alternatives, that have promoted what can be ways of transmission, but also revealing trauma that shape people into choices that would not otherwise be so transformative. I really appreciated particularly the poetic section that Dr. Yang has also made available to us, because it gives both the Chinese original texts written by those who are being interviewed, the 7 various different kinds of artists, as they're called, because they're not artists in what some of us might think of in a normal sense. They are playwrights, writers, poets, painters, sculptors, even a hymnologist that has had an exceptionally influential part in the shaping of Chinese worship and the identity that comes corporately through that kind of experience. So I find in this a book that is more, maybe we could call it an anthology, but I think it's even richer than that. I think it's a kaleidoscope of varieties of perspectives that are rarely found in a single volume. And they're increased and enriched by depths of interpretive theory. Most of the writers are not simply describing, they are evaluating, and they're providing hints at not only what has been done, but what can be done. And in this way, I find an immensely rich form of reading that is here. If I could use another metaphor, it is a cornucopia that just continues to flow out and make other suggestions. And in that light, being the kind of snotty academic that I am, please allow me to make a few suggestions. One is, I wish there were more female voices. I am a man. I know that. And I am so grateful that I could have the opportunity to respond to this extremely rich book. But women, Chinese, ethnically Chinese women, and women from other minorities who are Chinese citizens have a very major role in the shaping and character of contemporary Christianity in Chinese contexts. This could be given even more place. It is addressed, but it could be given more. There is also here a question that we might call clannishness. There is a form of corporate virtue that brings Christians together, but that same virtue can become a vice when it becomes divisive. And this too needs to be shared as part of the tension between transmission and trauma, that there is at times a tendency to declare oneself as the one true, and as a consequence, even with all the ecumenical richness of this volume, it does not always give credence to the fact that some are less open than others among our broader Christian relationships. So in this light, I would say that there is sometimes a tendency to provide the ideal without the real, and there's a tension that's here. I think this book does much better than most others in that regard. The realistic, concrete trauma that brings out these remarkable, new conceptions of identity, the creativity that flows from many, many sources. It's here, but it could be even highlighted in other and new ways, perhaps, that are just as fruitful. Maybe in the next book that you all do, yeah, that it would be there. For example, we could say identity and the inimical, the creative and the conflictual, the transmittive and the traumatic, the poetic that often, within its own beauty, reveals the pain and the perseverance that is part of a Christian identity that endures over time. I thoroughly recommend this book. I find it to be one of the most creative expressions of what is not one thing. China and Chinese is not one thing. There are many kinds of Chinese citizens, there are many kinds of Chinese persons, many kinds of Chinese identity, just as maybe another side to the critical, there are many kinds of Westerners. I don't know what a Westerner is, but nonetheless, we hear it constantly in the discourse of Christian theology and other things. And I would much rather talk about those who are outside of the country and name the nations and the nationalities and the identities in that way to enrich all sides of it. I hope that this reflection might stimulate even further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our speakers for the rich reflections and introductions to each of their chapter. So we're excited to open up the floor for questions from our audience. Just for our latecomers, this is a reminder. If you have a question, please type it out in the chat box, and I will do my best to help moderate and bring many of these questions as possible to our contributors. So we're going to begin with a question that was directed to Dirk, who is our architect. Unfortunately, he is not currently with us because it is 4 a.m. in Europe at this time. So I'm going to ask the question and trust maybe Dr. Ireland or Dr. Yang our editors could answer on his behalf. So the first question is addressed to the architectural contribution. What vision of community do these churches capture and reveal?
Well, clearly, Dirk did a great job in his chapter because it makes you want to read and find out what he says. You're trying to cheat and make me give the answer for you. But I will say he teases out a couple of dynamics. For instance, the one church that intentionally tried to look like just the block of apartments that it was in the neighborhood was an intentional choice to say, we are already part of this community. We're not separate from it. So there's just one example of how he tries to look at the creative ways that churches responded to unusual church building styles, but did it thoughtfully. Or even if they weren't doing it thoughtfully, what they implied by the decisions they made. So it's a really excellent chapter and a unique contribution, particularly in the field of missiology. How many times do you see architecture and missiology sort of coming together? I think it's a really fantastic piece of work.
All right. Thank you for that answer, Dr. Ireland, on Dirk's behalf. Our next question turns towards language and the theological framing of the volume itself. The person asked, they were curious about the choice of the term witness for expressing a Chinese missionary impulse. Is witness a common theme across these chapters? Is this a theological position?
Maybe I can share a little bit. We actually explained that in the introductory chapter. We use the term witness because that's the word Jesus gave in Acts 1:8, that you will receive power with the Holy Spirit come on. You will be my witnesses. So that gave us the sense of wide, like the paradigm to investigate Chinese understanding and of mission, if you use that term, or participate in the activity. I guess we argue against the narrow way of defining mission as proclamation. We said witness is a term that embraces identity, creativity, transmission, and poetics, what God is doing, who God is. And so it is in the spirit of David Bosch in his book. I mean, the term mission has so much baggage with the colonial history, and the scholars of mission and world Christianity have debated about it, and some say we can even do away with it, and that's basically the reason we choose witness, and that allows us to include this breadth, like this wide breadth and depth of writings, as what you have just heard.
Thank you, Dr. Yang. Building on that idea, our next question also focused on the theme of transmission. This person was curious to know, how does transmission account for the politics of reception and its pneumatological consciousness as the missionary engagements play out?
Excuse me, I wonder if one of our authors from the transmission section might have a thought or a reflection on that. That might be an unfair question to Alexander, but I was also seeing he may be our representative for the transmission section right now. Alexander, if you'd like, you can make a comment on that, or maybe just a larger comment on some of the dynamics of transmission that you were able to draw out in one of the most extraordinarily researched pieces on Orthodox Christianity in China that I've seen. It's just fantastic.
What I found especially interesting in this chapter, that the relations between missionaries and Chinese Christians were so complex. It was not that we would expect to be, like we all, as Jesus Christ said, that everyone will see that you are my disciple if you will have love with each other. And that was not really the case originally between missionaries and Chinese Christians. So the history of the Orthodox Church in China actually reveals the complexity not only between relations with Chinese officials, but also within the church itself. So I think that would be probably especially interesting for someone who is interested in reading this part about transmission.
May I jump in as well to just give a few comments? This depends on the editors, if you want.
Yes, please.
If one of the tensions between having a new faith enter into a cultural context that's already well established, it's civilized in this sense, opens doors to a lot of conflicts. For example, the very title, Shenjing, the term that's used for the Bible, originally was the term that was used for the scriptures of the Ru canon, that particularly as we move into the Qing dynasty from the 17th century, it was identified specifically with the Ru tradition and the 4 books and the 5 classics. That tension sets up political, conflicts that are really, at times, very inimical. When you have a person who is being called Tianzi, the son of heaven, and he is at times given that title in a text that it claims to come from the Middle East and then drops into China at various different points within its cultural context. It's threatening the imperial authority, So this tension between Christian identity within Chinese context and the political, at various different times, the political structures that could be easily engaged in conflict with it are quite concrete.
Thank you so much for your reflections. We'll conclude a time of Q&A. Thank you everyone again for your rich reflections and questions as well. It is my privilege to invite Dr. Kirstine Kim to formally make an announcement for us all. Dr. Kim, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Along with my co-editors, Steve Bevans and Mika Ruokanen, of the book series Theology and Mission in World Christianity. I've just put the link in the chat. It is a great honor to launch Chinese Christian Witness, Identity, Creativity, Transmission, and Poetics. This is volume 38 in the De Gruyter Brill series, Theology and Mission in World Christianity. Thanks to its links with the International Association for Mission Studies, or IAMS, where this volume was conceived, TMWC is the most active series in theology and religion at Brill and is projected to reach 47 volumes by the end of the year. We editors knew that this would be a landmark volume. I cannot do much more than add one more to the many accolades we have already heard. These are the summary words of one of our anonymous reviewers, who is based in China. He wrote, "This unique piece of research in the field of missiology and mission studies offers an eye-opening perspective on the phenomenon, which might become one of the main factors molding world Christianity in the decades to come. That is, China mainland Christians' special evangelistic and missional spirituality, theology, and dedication. No other publication like this exists yet. This should be a must for anyone interested in the future development of the global church." So my congratulations, all of our congratulations to both editors and to all the contributors.
Thank you so much. And I want to echo my thanksgiving to the contributors. Their work was heroic. They did amazing pieces. And I hope that those very quick 2-minute glimpses with, at least on my computer, out of sync lips, if you could just look away and listen to it, it was enough to say, I want to see more. I want to go deeper into this book. It really is fantastic. Our invitation to you, of course, in this world now is if you do happen to read part of the book or all of it, to tell Amazon or other places how much you liked it. This becomes critical for the survival of books and series, so we do appreciate that. But mostly we invite you to relish in this extraordinary collection that we believe is eye-opening to the diversity of Chinese Christian witness. So thank you all for being with us tonight. Many blessings, or for those of you just beginning your day, may it be fantastic. Thank you for your time.
And for those interested in, can I just add, we are requesting a discounted price from Brill. So we will send that out if they give to us, to you in your individual emails. I know it's very expensive with Brill, but as one reviewer says, it's worth every cent. And hopefully the discount will help. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your presence here. Blessings.
Thank you.